Welcome to Richer Soul, Corey Kupfer. It's great to have you join us today.
It's great to be with you, Rocky.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, listen, I didn't grow up poor, but it was lower middle class, paycheck to paycheck, and I look back now and think, wow, thank God there wasn't a health issue. My father didn't lose his job because in the beginning he was the only one working, and like it could have gone bad, right? But fortunately, we managed that paycheck to paycheck life when I was younger. We didn't go on vacations, we didn't eat out, I didn't get on a plane till I was in law school. Fortunately, my folks later became more comfortable, but that was when I was adult. So yeah, it was really a lower middle class paycheck to paycheck upbringing.
Did they teach you much about money or?
Not really. I mean, other than the messages that I got that were much more around, money's hard to come by, and you got to work hard for it, and you got to budget, and it's scarce, and not that not that my parents were sort of negative people talking about that all the time, but that was just their reality, right? At the time I was growing up, so I was very sort of in tune to that, and later in life had actually did a lot of conscious work around my relationship to money because, I just had a very limited view of what was possible from my upbringing.
And that was the question I was going to ask you was that scarcity mindset, did it carry through to you as an adult, and were you able to break free from it? It sounds like you've done the work to do so.
Yeah, I mean, so, first of all, it started just situationally with the fact that, I went, there's a big stress on education in my family, which is true in a lot of families, in certain cultures. And, I ended up going to law school, and I did well at a good law school, and it came out in the 80s when it was a boom time. So I had all these job offers. And I remember, I started at $46,000 a year in 1985. And that was like huge money, and then we got to raise to 48. And then there was a time when the big firms suddenly hopped everybody up 15,000. So the next thing I knew, within a year, I was making $63,000. And I was like, at that point, I was like, oh my God, this is like, what do I do with all this money? But here's the funny part, and it's not unusual. So I'm in my 20s, and I'm a typical sort of, kid in my 20s who first has money, and I'm spending more money, through most of my 20s than I made, right? So I had credit card debt. And, I didn't have any savings. I certainly wasn't doing any kind of contributions or philanthropy or anything like that. But I was making, but I was living a fun, nice life for a 20-something-year-old in New York.
Well, New York's, well, actually, that's funny because I grew up outside of New York, and in the 80s, New York wasn't the nicest place.
No, it was
It's
a
very
big
different.
mix. Yeah, definitely a big mix. But, going from there, I mean, especially when I put in like 5 or 6 years at big firm, medium firm, and then I just knew I didn't want to work for somebody for the rest of my life. And I hung out a shingle as a 31-year-old with no clients whatsoever. Was taking cash advances off credit cards to pay my rent. Had no income coming in. Built up a practice from nothing. And during that time, I started getting involved in some things that had me re-examine my relationship to money. One of the first ones was I got active in the Hunger Project, which is a nonprofit that empowers people to end their own hunger. It doesn't give out food. And I remember there was so Lynn Twist, who has since written The Soul of Money and has tape programs, whatever. Back then, she had none of that. She was just the head fundraiser, the head of strategic funding for the Hunger Project. And she used to talk about money as spiritual energy, and it's like water, and it has to flow. And talking about how rich people related to money, and this was like a whole new concept to me. And then her successor, a woman named Peg Thatcher, said to me, "Oh, Corey, you can be a global investor in the Hunger Project." And that meant contributing $25,000. I had never written a check for more than 50 or $75 to a charity. And she sees me as somebody who could write a $25,000 check. Rocky, sometimes you have the blessing of some people holding you or seeing you bigger than you can see yourself. And that year, I actually did write a $25,000 check at a time when I was making 100 some odd $1,000 a year, and made that a priority. And that was the first thing of many things I did that started really reshaping my relationship.
And people say, and the studies have proven it, you actually get more happiness in giving than you do in receiving.
No question. In fact, I mean, I'm going to skip a lot of journey, right? But just to like sort of where I am at this point in my life is that, I could just do what I'm doing and live a very nice life for the rest of my life with my family. And I travel, I live on the water here. It's like, what drives me more than anything else around money on my philanthropic goals. Like I want to make a lot more money so I can have a lot more impact at this point.
And I think that's what people forget. They look at rich people, oh, they're so evil. They don't help. And I'm like, you know what? Have you ever worked for a poor person? You may not get a paycheck this week, right?
Right, right.
And if they're poor, they can't give. Now, we may not always agree with how they give or what they give, but the reality is money is how people get help. And that rising tide lifts all boats. Did you enjoy your career as an attorney?
So in the very beginning, my first couple of years, I did. It was exciting. It was new. I was doing these big leverage buyout deals and initial public offerings and M&A and all this stuff, and just learning like crazy. And I was in a great firm with some young partners, and with a very well-known guy who was the head partner, who was the kind of guy where he either like he loved you or hated you, and like at an extreme, and formed those opinions very, very early. And fortunately, I was one of the minority where he just took a liking to me. So I got phenomenal experience and whatever. But about two and a half years in, when that firm ended up having some issues because some partners left, and one of their big clients was Drexel Burnham, and Drexel Burnham was having their issues back then. And I changed firms. The next two firms I worked out, the second one was brutally horrible, just with the people and whatever. And then the next one was okay. But I didn't love. In fact, I really didn't like the practice of law in those 3.5, 4 years. And it brought me to a point when I was 30, 31, where I was like, I can't do this working for someone else anymore. I had gone high school, college, law school job, right? Because I didn't even know, like I didn't grow up in a family where there was an option to backpack around Europe for a year or become a ski bum in Colorado. It wasn't even on the menu. I didn't know people did that. And I had never taken any time off. And I had a ski share with a bunch of buddies up at Killington, Vermont. And I went up to the house and I left my firm and I took off. I skied 42 days. I took off a few months. And I really was thinking about, what do I really want to do? Do I want to go into some other kind of business because I don't really like practicing law? And what I ultimately determined was that 95% of what I hated practicing law was working for someone else and doing it in a way that wasn't within my vision, the way I wanted to create it, the way I thought clients should be treated, the way I wanted to build a team and the whole thing. And I ended up coming back and hanging out that shingle and paying my rent on credit cards and building it up from nothing.
Congratulations. And not only did you build it up from nothing, but you were highly profitable.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Like, what was the reasoning or what was the driver behind that?
Yeah. So, and listen, I don't want to make it seem like we were highly profitable from minute one, right? We've learned, but there were some things I did early, and now we run a firm that runs at 2.5 to 3 times the average profitability of a typical law firm. But in the beginning, I started out, like other people did in terms of looking at what market rates were and charging stuff, whatever. But one of the things that was different, most lawyers actually hate, and this is not universally true, but a lot of lawyers actually hate math or hate finances or spreadsheets or whatever. Like when they put the math section on the LSATs, which is the standardized test that you have to take, for lawyers to get into law school, like most of my friends were like running away from it. For me, it was like, that was my easiest section, right? So I think, my being good with math was a starter point for that. But like I was running P&Ls, I was running cash flow analyses, I was running balance sheets when I had like 3 clients and barely any money, right? So I had a mentality of wanting to understand the numbers from day one. So that was the first good thing. And then I would do these profitability analysis. But we don't do this anymore for a long time. But back in the day, we were doing some residential real estate closing, condos, co-ops in the city and whatever. And, there was an average rate that people were charging. And I realized for the way I wanted to serve clients, which was much more high touch and customized and not throwing them off to some paralegal and them not being able to reach me on the phone, that I couldn't make money at the standard rate. So I just decided, let me see what happens if I double it. Okay. And I doubled it. I just doubled the rate. Right. And here's the funny part. Like I didn't slow down. I remember bringing in an associate back then, and she was sort of charging the going rate. And I said, no, we're going to double your rate. And she said, oh my God, how are we going to do that? I'm going to lose business. I said, how much business do you think you're going to lose? She said, I think I could lose up to 40% of my business. So I kind of chuckled because I said, even if you're right and you lose 40% of your business, if we're doubling it, you are making more money for 60% of the work, right? So she's like, oh yeah, you're right. And it turned out that she did 82% of the revenue of the clients that she had done the year before at twice the rate that next year, right? So that was a lesson for me that you can follow the herd, but how do you be successful when you're charging more than the herd? Well, I came to the conclusion pretty early on. I realized the fact that people talk about price and cost, but really that's not what they care about. They care about value. They care about getting value. It's just that a lot of people, even in professional services, they become a commodity because they can't distinguish themselves, right? And then if you're a commodity, you have to compete on price because you have nothing else. Whereas even on these little real estate closings, when people say to me, "Oh, this other attorney charges half," and I would say to them, "Well, listen, we are much higher touch. You're going to be able to get in touch with me. We're going to look, if things don't go smoothly, we're going to be there. I'm going to be there for whatever it was. And if that's not what you want, you should go to that lower cost provider. But that also allows you to get the ideal client. So that was the start of it. And I just kept, focusing on that over time, and then did a couple of things. One, got known in some niches where we really have a great reputation, right? And that helps you, right? If you're known as one of the top players in any given space, you can charge more. And also, this was one of the things that I had coming out of big firms. I thought that the whole fee approach at big firms with clients, many big firms, the ones I was at, medium-sized firms, was very inauthentic and disingenuous, right? They'd have a rack rate. Clients would negotiate a discount. They would give them a discount, but the discount was off of a fake rate anyway, right? And then also, if clients negotiated for more of a discount, there'd be pressure at actually bill more hours to make up for the fact that the rate was lower. And so I just have a philosophical approach I've been doing for years with clients, where they'll come to me and say, "Hey, Corey, can you get my other providers give me a discount?" And I'd say, "Listen, we don't discount, and not because we very carefully determine our rates. I am confident we provide value at or beyond those rates, and because we don't want to get into," and I explain this disingenuous relationship where there's any incentive to create some artificial rate and discount it, or to up the hours to make up for the discount.
You don't do, though, value pricing in the sense of you're still billing hourly. You're not coming up with like a fixed
No,
monthly.
on as much as we can do, we do it on a fixed fee. So
Okay.
almost any kind of draft, if we're drafting an operating agreement, shareholders agreement, employment agreement, an NDA, I can list 1,000 agreements that we have fixed fees for. And the reason for that is that listen, with professional services, and if you bill hourly on everything, there's a disincentive to create efficiencies and create great forms. And by the way,
Mhm.
this is only going to be this issue is only going to be accelerated by all the AI tools and other things that are coming out that are going to create efficiencies, right? And the hourly billing model actually has an incentive to be inefficient because you make more money. And the more non-billable time you spend becoming efficient, you make less money, right? And one of the things I've discovered, at least with our types of professional successful clients, is that for them, fee certainty, meaning knowing what it's going to cost them and how much they have to budget, is much higher value to them than saving a few bucks. So if I can tell them it's going to be X, even if my effective hourly rate ends up to be higher, especially because I've done all this work to create great forms and create efficiencies, my clients have no problem with that. In fact, they love it. Now, there are certain things we still, like if we're doing a negotiated M&A deal, which we do a lot of on the sell side, where the other side's drafting, and we don't know whether we're going to get back, a 32-page asset purchase agreement or a 92-page asset purchase agreement, we still charge hourly on certain things, but we try to do as much as we can on a fixed fee basis.
And that's kind of the trend we're seeing is going in that direction because, as you said, people prefer to have a fixed known cost instead of the surprise. And it allows you to create efficiencies, which means your hourly goes through the roof comparatively. The better you get at it over time.
That's right.
It's just natural. But then you have the focus to do that is to improve, which unfortunately sometimes there's disincentives to that, which you kind of mentioned. The other thing that you've done is, and you say this about every business though, it should be a lifestyle business.
Yeah.
So I love that because I'm a lifestyle business.
Right.
So let's talk about this.
But this is my reframing on a lifestyle business, and I've raised it so many times on my own podcast and other things because I so believe this. And let me tell you where it comes from. It comes from the fact that I've seen entrepreneurs who are driven by various things where they think it's what they want to do, and then they get to a place and they're like, "Wait a second, I've quadrupled the size of my company, but I'm not necessarily making more money. I'm miserable. I have more headaches and whatever." So my view is, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, you should be creating a business that has you have the lifestyle that you want. Normally, lifestyle business is often used as a derogatory term, as somebody who wants to keep things small on the in this entrepreneurial pressure and judgment that everybody should scale, right? For me, whether your lifestyle business is that you have this nice business and you're not looking to scale and you're very happy with what you do and with your clients and the amount of money you make, I have no negative judgment on it at all. In fact, I think that's amazing. Like if somebody like you or others have found that way. At the same time, I use an example of a friend of mine who has a robotics construction startup, right? Funded company, the kind of company you have to raise capital for, is under all that kind of pressure, is traveling to the Middle East every couple of months because he's got a contract on this neon project in Saudi Arabia, right? And whatever. But unlike some other people who are doing it out of ego or whatever, like he's meant to do this. He's called to do this. He's been talking about like attempting to build a unicorn again, not just because it's within his being that he wants to do something that's disruptive, that's creative, that's breakthrough, that makes a huge difference, right? So that's his lifestyle business. And you know what? He's got a couple of young kids and he's got a wife, and they're on board with it, even with his travel and whatever. So when I say every entrepreneur should create a lifestyle business, that could be a funded rocket ship, or it could be a nice little business with you and an assistant. It's just my point more so is make sure you're clear on what you want your life to be like and how you want your business to support that, whatever that looks like.
I find most people don't have clarity. You've worked with a lot of business owners, successful people. Do they have clarity on what they want, or are they just kind of following the whatever or what they're told they should do, like scale, grow, more, this, that?
Yeah. A lot of it is the latitude, right? They're either just sort of going along, following, what seems to be, or they have these, drivers that are external, right? It's interesting. My wife just wrote a book called Intentional Ambition, and I'm not looking to just plug it. It's applicable here. Like she looks at the healthy and unhealthy, drivers of ambition. What is wounded ambition is what she calls it. And I think it's important for all of us to look at that, right? What is really driving us? What is making us do what we want to do? And one of the ways to do that is to, I'm a big believer in taking a step back, right? Getting out of your environment. It's the classic, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? It's so true. And doing visioning work, what do you want to create? What is 5 years? I have a 5-3-1 visioning process I can talk about. But the point is that, a lot of times people are reacting and getting pushed in a direction, whether that's by people saying you have to raise capital, whether it's by clients saying we want this or we want that, right? But they haven't created something that they're pulling towards, that they're looking to manifest. And I find that the folks who have a vision of what they want to create that is not based upon any reaction or past stuff or trauma or what their parents want or what their other entrepreneurs want, it really comes from a pure place. Those are the happiest, most successful people that I know. And I certainly practice that a lot.
I didn't do much visioning in the first half of my life, but I did a lot of visioning in the
Yeah,
second
yeah.
half of life. And so at that point, actually, I shouldn't say that. There were parts of my life that were visioned,
Yeah.
but it wasn't complete to every part of it.
Yeah.
Later in life, everything was visioned. It was clear across the board. And, the surprising thing is how much more money I make, even though it's not work anymore. Because when you have fun, it's not really work. It's tap dancing to work. And so it's fun.
Right, I get it. I love what I do. People say to me, as I'm not in my 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s even anymore. And people say to me, "Oh, are you thinking about retiring?" And my response is honestly, retiring from what? Like I live with this fundamental concept of ideal life now. Like I'm committed to creating my ideal life now, right? I want to spend time with the people I want. I want to be doing what I want. I want to travel when I want. I want to live where I want. And fortunately, I've been able to come from that scarcity, a mentality around money and do a lot more work, which we haven't talked about, and at great coaches and, programs and books and whatever. I mean, even as recently as, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I had really figured out how to attract money, but I still wasn't building a lot of wealth. And I'll give credit to Barbara Yuson, go by Barbara Stanley. She's got a lot of books out. She mainly works with women, but she's a friend of my wife. And we had one single conversation in which Barbara sort of got my background or whatever. And she said to me, "I get it. Like you are phenomenal at bringing in income, bringing in rent. Like, you're great at creating cash flow. You just don't know how to build wealth." And like I
Yeah,
stopped in my
it's a
tracks.
separate skill.
Yeah, I stopped in my tracks and I was like, okay. And even just having that distinction in my mind, you want to talk about getting clarity, getting a distinction, had me build wealth, in the last maybe 12 years, it's been, at a rate that's way beyond. I mean, I was living a great life, but, the money would be up and down and whatever. Now the money doesn't only flow in for my expenses, but, I got systems where money gets put away here, invested in this, invested in that, right? And it's just, and there's buckets for stuff. Even this, for the people who, if anybody sees this on video, right, as opposed to the audio, I have this painting behind me that I got from a French artist in Paris that I love, whatever. And, it's not cheap. And, but I had a bucket for it, right? This is my discretionary spending for something that I love that's going to create my life. That's great. So, even that skill to build wealth, was something that was a new distinction for me. And then I started creating a vision around building wealth, not just earning a lot of income, and that's manifested as well.
And I'm the same way. People are like, "Are you going on vacation?" I'm like, "I don't know what vacation is." That doesn't mean we don't travel, but work, travel, family, life, everything meshes
Yeah.
together. It's not like I'm running away to like, "Oh, I
Right.
have to go on vacation." It's like, how does life allow all of that to happen? And the same thing with retirement. As long as I am capable, I'm working because I love what I do, feeds me, and it keeps me engaged. And I may change what that looks
Sure.
like or the hours or how it looks, but I have no desire to stop. And I don't have regrets. So, like, if there's something I want to do, I'll go do it and we'll make it work and we'll just figure it out. And it goes in seasons. So, let's talk about this because you do this vision process with a lot of successful entrepreneurs. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I call it a 5-3-1 process, right? There's a lot of people when they do visioning work, they start with today and they look forward. The problem with that is that when you start with today, you're starting with where you are today and what got you here won't get you there and it's just and it's bound to be much more incremental. And it doesn't come from I mean I believe that the truth lies from within, that we can manifest the world with it within. And I don't want to I know people have issues with things like the law of attraction or whatever. Obviously it takes effort, right? You don't just sit around and say, oh, I'm wishing for $1 million and it shows up, right? We're not talking about that, but we're talking about creating a clear vision and path on what you're going to work towards and knowing and figuring out the steps to get there. And some people try to do that forward. What I do is I take people through a process where they get quiet, they sit down, I take, and they envision today. So let's say, if we're recording today on June 12th, right, 225, I'm going to say it is June 12th, 2030. Okay. We're not looking forward. It is today, present tense language in your head, right? It's like today is June 12th, 2030. Okay. And I'm going to have them look around, like with their eyes closed, they're going to see, what do they see? Who's around them? Where are they living? What is their ideal situation? What are they doing, for work? What's happening? Even like, and I bring in all the senses, right? What do they feel? What do they smell? What do they like? And they get a visual picture of that ideal, right? And obviously this is several hour process, so I'm very shortcutting it here. But we get them to a place where it just comes from. It's not coming from logic. It's just coming from an internal place. Whether you believe that you're channeling spirit or whether it's just coming from within you, your inner truth, however you want to look at it. And then this is a key point. What we have them do, because the minute you put language around something, it's limited, right? So the next thing I have them do is that they draw. Okay, when they come out of this meditation after it could be 45 minutes an hour, they just draw what they saw. And I always say to people, listen, I can't even draw a good stick figure. I am no artist. This is not about creating some phenomenal painting. This is for you. All right. And they just draw what they see. And some people draw scenes of, a house and where they're living, family. Some people just get words or symbols or whatever that comes out, but generally it's a drawing and you get that all out. Then I have them, and this is a long process without a break, then I have them journal, right? That everything they saw, everything they heard, everything they smelled, everything they whatever, what were they doing, where were they living, what was happening in business, what's happening with their family, their health, all this stuff. And literally have them write, and it's got to be, there's science on, you don't want to type this, you want to hand write it. There's science around the value of that. And they write and they write and they write to the point where like their hand is like hurting. And I even say to them, listen, if you can't think of anything and what you hear in your head is, I can't think of anything else, you write down, I can't think of anything else. And you literally write your thoughts because sometimes that kicks up. All right. So we go through that whole process, we come out, and then what happens is, because the reason it's a 531 is, then we outline what are the key points of that. Oh, I'm living in this, we have 2 homes in these amazing places. My kids are doing great. I'm running marathon, whatever it is for you, right? And those are the key points for year 5. And then we ask the question, okay, in year 3, what must have been inevitably true for year 5 to have manifested? Right? So, okay, my business is this size in year 5. Oh, it must have been at least here in year 3, right? I have a 1-year-old kid or 2-year-old kid, whatever it is, in year 5. Well, my partner must have been pregnant in year 3, right? And then you bring it back to year 1, right? The same way, one must have been inevitably true in year 1. And then if you really want to do this, right, you can break that down into quarters, right? You see how we're working backwards, and you can say, okay, what do I need to do each quarter to hit those goals, right? A lot of people put these quarterly goals, these rocks or these whatever, but it's not based upon a thing. And then when you have to do that thing that's tough, like maybe you reach out to that new prospect or work out when you don't feel like it, if you're holding that in the context of that inevitably will create that 5-year vision that I saw, this little thing, just because I work backwards, it's a much more powerful place to do it, and you're much more likely to take those actions.
I've done something similar, but mine started with the eulogy.
I've done that as well. That's a phenomenal thing.
And then it's, what kind of life do I want to live? The problem with that one, it gives me the big frameworks.
Yes.
It doesn't give me my data. Doesn't give me enough of the day to day, this quarter, next quarter, following quarter. So it's a little bit softer in that area. But knowing what I want, I know if something is taking me that direction or away from it.
Yes.
And then I can use other frameworks for the 1, 3, 5-year type of process. And the funny thing is with these, even if you do nothing but write it out and forget about it, you'd be shocked at how often it comes true.
No question. And I will tell you, listen, I can't tell you how many times I did visioning work, especially in my earlier years, put it aside, didn't even focus on it. And then when I went back a year or 2 later and looked at it, or 3, whatever, I'm like, yep, did that. Having said that, that is true. So it's huge through the visioning work, even if you don't focus on it. But if you, in addition to, like, I've got a vision board sitting up right up here. My wife and I do annual visioning processes. We actually do quarterly visioning retreats, just my wife and I. Every quarter we take a 3-day weekend, and we go somewhere. It could be just a close drive, or it could be hop on a plane, and we reconnect. We've been doing this last probably 5 or 6 years, where we keep it present quarterly, and that's even accelerated the pace of our manifestation.
I like that you have your wife along and that you do it together, because at the end of the, you are living life together. So you should be planning together, thinking together, and coming together on that. One of the things that I know you do within this, then, is that where you do your highest investment use exercise? Is that part of this, or is that later?
It's just another exercise that I did this highest and best use exercise I did for the first time. Now it's probably almost 20 years ago. And so, it's sort of like Ideal Life Now. Highest and best use is one of my fundamental life principles, and I created an exercise around it. So what does that mean? Okay. So I think this should be true for anybody in life, but certainly if you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, a high-level executive, right, where your time is your most valuable commodity, right, most times, more than anything else, money, whatever, then you should be spending your time only on your highest and best use area things. Some people call it a special sauce. They call it unique talents, whatever. Highest and best use is the framing that works well for me. And there are 3 elements to that are super important. One is, it's got to be something you're great at. Right? I'm in the camp, there are people who are like, oh, you got to work on your weaknesses. And by the way, in personal life, in relationships, okay, yes, I think that is true. In business, I'm in the camp of you double, triple, and quadruple down on your strengths, and you get other people or systems or outsourcing, whatever it is, to handle the weaknesses, as opposed to wasting any time there. So I'm a big believer, do what you're great at. Second thing, though, is that, I'm really good at drafting legal documents. I've had a team that's done that for me for 20 years, right? I never want to have to draft from scratch a legal document ever again. I used to be very good at that, but I don't love it. So you have to love it. You have to be passionate about it. A lot of people stop there. They're like, oh, I'm great at it, I love it. But the piece they're missing is that it's also has to be highly leveraged, got to move the needle, got to make a difference. Like whatever you're doing at these high levels as the business owner, entrepreneur, right? Even if you love it and you're great at it, if it's not really moving the needle, if it's not something that only really you can do and leverage, for the success of your business, the impact on your clients, the impact on your employees, then you shouldn't be doing it. So what I do is I have people determine their highest best use areas. Should be 3 to 5, like 5 max. Okay. And then this is the tough part. This is the part where, if somebody's serious, spend a week or more, usually a week's enough, and literally track everything you do. Okay, spend 15 minutes, searching the internet for this. Spend half hour on billing. Was on the phone with a client for this. Whatever it is, without judgment, just record it. Literally track your time for a week, an entire week. Then after the fact, you go back and you look at how much of your time is in your highest and best use areas that you determine. Right. When I first did this almost 20 years ago, I was dismayed to find out that I was only spending what I thought was about 20% of my time in my highest and best use areas. Now, in hindsight, it was probably more like 5 to 7% of my time, and I was pretty generous, because I was so I couldn't even deal with the fact that it was only 20%. But here's the gift of if you're courageous enough and willing to do that exercise, when you get to identify a gap, then you can put a plan in place. Like if I say, okay, I'm only at 20%, let me look at this other 80%, and then I ask the following questions: what am I doing that doesn't have to be done at all? Right? Time wasters, all that kind of stuff, whatever. Second of all, what am I doing that can be systemized so that I don't have to do it? Third of all, who in my organization can I delegate this to? Because it's not my highest best use areas. And then fourth, if you don't have somebody internal to delegate to, who do I either need to hire or outsource to or contract with or whatever to get to do? Which, of course, nowadays, when I first did that exercise, there was a lot less opportunity with VAs and partial people and Fiverr, like all these ways you can get people who are great at something to do it for you. So you want to look at that, and then what you do is you just start moving on that. I'll share that I went from my quote unquote 20% to 50% in my highest and best use area in 1 year, right? Because there was a lot of low hanging fruit. It took me 8 years to get from 50% to 90%. Because you may know what you need to do, but maybe you don't have the budget to hire somebody, or you're busy and it takes time to put the system in place. But I never lost sight of that. I kept working at it, and now I am regularly at 90%. I'd like to think someday it'll be 100, but I think there's always going to be something, right? And I'm very happy at 90% of my highest best use areas, and I built it's encouraged me to build a phenomenal team, to build great systems. It's part of why we're so profitable, right? Because I'm doing, and I try to have my other people doing what's in their highest and best use areas. So it's a lot more efficient, effective, of quality to the clients.
Did you read my email last month that I sent to all my clients and followers? It was about eliminate, optimize, automate.
There you go.
In that
there
order.
You go.
First, does this need to be done? If it doesn't, or if it's low value, get rid of it. The second is to optimize it. And then once it's optimized, you automate, delegate. And I think in today's world, it's much, much easier to automate compared to what it was in the past. There's so many different softwares that can do a lot of it. The last part is when you have a good system, as needed, you put a person in to run that system. But I think you have to build it for them, or you have to find a person who's good at building systems. Because just like you talked about before with money, most people are great at making money or generating income. Very few people are good at keeping income. A lot of people are really good at running a system. Very few people are good at creating a system. And yet we get confused with these things. And that's what I find. So I think that's a big part of it. But when you have this kind of clarity and then you clean up your time, it's amazing what you can do. I do a reverse exercise. So because all of my scheduled time is on my Google Calendar. So once a quarter, I sit down and I look at all my scheduled time, podcasts, client things, networking, and I just write down how much time all of those activities took. And then I go, well, if they only took that much time, what the hell am I doing with the rest of my time? Because I know that's all wasted, yes. Right? Which tells me I'm probably running at about 50% wasted. But part of it is I'm okay with it. Like, I'm not trying to fill my day entirely, right? I'm okay with a little bit of goofing off. It's life.
Yeah, and that's for me, Raghi. It's like we're saying the same thing. It's when you are aware and you make a conscious decision, right, around that. Whether that's, hey, I'm going to take 50% of my time, whatever it is. then that's great, right? There's no judgment on what people want to do. It's just that so many people are unconscious. Like if you ask them what they do in a day, they wouldn't be able to tell you, or if they thought they'd be able to tell you, they'd be totally wrong if you compared it to what they actually do, right? They have a misperception of what they're doing all their days, So if you are clear and conscious and know the facts and you make a conscious choice in whatever direction, love it. That's great.
Show me your bank account and your calendar, and I'll tell you all about you. I'll see where the money and the time is going, and
Absolutely.
it becomes crystal clear. You alluded to this before. You've done a lot of personal growth
Yeah.
work. What types of things have you done, and how have they helped
Yeah.
you?
So, I mentioned already, and there's a lot more I can talk about specifically, which I won't get into around like my relationship to money. So I definitely did a lot of that. I've done a lot of this stuff, whether that's I'll give one example. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, but like a big Bob Proctor, person. Bob, I think Bob is one of the top people to understand paradigms. And what a paradigm is, it's a multitude of habits that we just unconsciously act out of, right? And if we want to make significant transformation in our lives, and I'm not talking about incremental growth, you can make a few more bucks or whatever, but if we want to really break through something, whatever, we got to figure out what paradigm we're in, right? I mean, when I was younger, just related back to money, because we've been talking about that, like as long as I looked at myself at this lower middle class kid from Brooklyn, and who am I to do better than this, right? Like I was limited. I don't care how many skills I learned. I don't care how much I hustled, whatever. There was an inherent limitation, right, in that identity. Okay. And I had to break through that paradigm. There was another one where I realized that so even when I broke through that somewhat and started making a lot more money, people would call me and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And my answer was always the same word: busy. I'm busy. Right. And it took me a while through some of this work to realize, oh, wow, I identify busy with success. Like I don't even have a concept of success without being busy. So I need to be busier to be more successful. But the truth is, you cap out at that, right? Because you only have so many hours in a day and so much time you can create. So I had to decouple. So I almost never say I'm busy now. And trust me, if you look at my calendar and everything I do, where I travel and the back-to-back calls I'm on, somebody else would define that as busy. But energetically, I don't relate to it that way, right? And I decoupled success from my own busyness, right? So in fact, the game became how much more successful I could be with working less, with being less busy, right? And because there's no correlation, at a certain level of the grind, right? There is a correlation. The harder you work, the more you make. But beyond that, there is absolutely no correlation to it, right? You can provide value in so many other ways. So that was a lot of work I did. I've done relationship stuff. I've done business growth stuff. In fact, along the lines of what you're talking about, and I know this was at one of Harv Ecker's Millionaire Mind work he used to do. He had a thing for businesses, and I wish I could credit these two guys because I don't know who they are. I don't remember, but they had something that I learned in this thing where they said, hey, most people relate to certain things like they have a particular talent in it, right? This concept of being an unconscious competent. Like you're great at something, but you don't know how you do it, right? And the problem with being an unconscious competent is that you cannot systemize or train people on it if you hold it as like it's just your talent, right? And they said that, yeah, I mean, there's certain things where there's talent, I mean, not everybody's going to be able to dunk a basketball, right? Or whatever, there's physical talent or ability. But most things we do in business, yeah, even though you think it's talent, you actually have a system. It's an indistinguished system on how you do it, right? So the thing that I realized was I'm like, oh, I'm really good at developing business, right? And not everybody has that talent. How can I train my junior people on how to do that? Because it's just a talent. Well, when they took us through this thing to say you probably have a system beyond the scenes, I realized this is back in the day when you were meeting everybody in person. Now I get all my clients and I don't meet them, right? But take that. I did have a system. I just didn't have it distinguished. When the person would come into my office, right, I would greet them friendly. I would immediately mention the connection we had, the referral source, right, who introduced us. I would start asking the questions about their business. If they asked me about my fees, I would not answer that up front because not to avoid it, but I would say, listen, I need to understand more what your needs are and what you want to do, and then I could, quote fees, which of course now they're telling me essentially what's important to them. I'd listen carefully. I won't go through the whole thing, but I realized I was able to write out all those steps of and I did it the same way every time. I just didn't realize it, right? It was the same. So now I'm not saying that somebody you train on it's going to be automatically as good as you, because there is experience and there is some natural ability and ability to connect with people, but there is an ability to create a system that somebody can work with and adapt to themselves as opposed to if you hold it as a talent. So that was a big realization about some of the business growth work, that I've done. And then, I would say outside of some of like, just the personal growth courses and books and trainings, I've been a member of Entrepreneurs Organization since 2008, and that's a peer-to-peer learning organization. It's not a networking organization. And just spending time, because listen, if you're an entrepreneur, your friends from college and your family and your buddies and whatever, and who are not entrepreneurs, they don't get it. It's not because they're bad people. It's just that it's not their experience. They don't know what it is to build a business, create the vision, make payroll, pivot when you need to, deal with, whatever, right? Not have any guarantees. So the ability to be in an organization that is now like 19,000, almost 20,000 members worldwide, and hundreds of members in the LA chapter. I was in the New York chapter for years before I moved out to LA, and being just with other entrepreneurs who get it, who've been through it, who can share their experiences about, yeah, I remember that time when my business was down 30%, or when I lost a key employee, or when a competitor suddenly came in, or a regulation change that affected my business. That's been a huge growth opportunity for me, as well as being in this amazing entrepreneurial community.
And that's how we connected.
It is
through mutual friends. I have tons of friends in EO and tons of friends in a ton of different peer-to-peer networks. It's kind of I know if they've accepted you, you're probably a decent person. It makes it easier to connect across those types of things. The one thing I found with self-development, it seems like every time I peel a layer, another one appears. It's a little annoying, but I think I'm going to come resigned to the fact that it's just going to be from now on. Is that the case, or do you finally get to the center?
No, listen, I guess there is, in theory, this, I don't know if you want to call it, spiritual realization or whatever. But let me see. If it exists, I haven't gotten there yet. So, yeah, I mean, talking about this, like peeling the layers, of the onion. And Rocky, I say that, I mean, listen, 99% of the time, I love the fact that I'm on a constant learning and introspective and personal growth journey. But yeah, there are these times where you just say to yourself, like when you uncover that, like I thought I had that one handled, and then you peel the next layer around, and you're like, can I just maybe just for a day, a week or even a day, just go back to being totally unconscious? Like, can I just take a break from this? Because once you open up that consciousness journey, you can't go back, and it does sometimes feel exhausting. But I think overall, it helps us create such a more amazing life. But I totally agree with you. And especially for those of us who are implementing, because here's the other thing that happens in some of these environments, whether it's the spiritual growth, the personal growth, business growth, people like become course junkies, right? And then, you look and you say, where is that being applied in their life? And I've always been somebody, a lot of these programs, even the good ones, will sort of try to upsell, and they're a business. I don't blame them. They're trying to upsell you on the next course, whatever, and I'll do something at a particular thing and do a course or two, whatever. And then I'm like, okay, nope, I may come back later, but I got to take these 5 or 10 or 2 or whatever, things that I learned out of this and actually go apply them, right? Before I learn some more stuff about myself or about the world.
And that is true. You can go to all the things you want, but if you don't apply it, it's irrelevant. Yeah, I think what I have found is, and it's true of everything in business, too often we treat the symptom, and to get to the core is more difficult. And I think with human beings, it's really difficult to get to the core. I guess actually, I shouldn't say that. You know why? Because we always start this podcast with the same question. We look at the core of the money story, right? I should probably be more focused on looking at my core of all my other stories and where did they come from and how did they come to be, because it's a universal principle. All that programming happened essentially in childhood.
That's right.
So you just got to go back and see what created that belief system. How do we break it? And you talked about like, oh, I got to work hard. You don't have to work hard to make money. That's a belief system, or I have to be busy or whatever it is. And there are things that we just say without thinking. But when you go back and you chase them, you fix it. So it takes a little bit.
And a lot of these things that we do are also so reinforced by society, right? Like there's a common, there's a collective agreement, the hustle culture, you have to work hard, like, or whatever it is, right? There's a collective agreement that's actually wrong, but that's sort of the default feeling. So it does take work, it does take courage, and it does take a body of work to really examine where these things come from, what's holding them in place, and how do I break through them, and do I want to continue with this belief system or paradigm? Or Bob, going back to Bob Proctor, he talks about, when you call it a belief system paradigm, he talks about what happens is when you start to push and break through a paradigm, right, or a belief system, he says you hit something called the terror barrier, right? Because there's all of these things in you that want to not go into that fearful unknown place and bring you back to safety and certainty and security in the way you've been operating for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. And you hit the terror barrier, and what happens is a lot of people turn back on the terror barrier and they go back to their their little world, right? And it takes courage to break through the terror barrier and get to the other side and blow up the existing paradigm. And the people who are able to do that are the people who create, phenomenal, successful, and happy lives.
So I guess if it's conventional wisdom, it's wrong.
A lot of times, a lot of times.
And maybe that's the thing. Go, hey, if everyone believes this, maybe I should challenge it and ask why that's the case and is it true? And kind of go back and look at that.
I mean, listen, let me ask, I mean, I guess, and again, I'm not like, I so respect all the choices people make in life, but, if conventional wisdom creates the reality of most people, and if you look at most people and do you want the life that they have? And frankly, do they even want the life that they have? The answer is no. So that's the result of conventional wisdom.
It is. I struggle with why do these people believe this and how are they like that? And yet what I just need to do is let go of trying to figure out why and just go my way and stop trying to fix everything, that natural tendency of mine. And I've learned to let go of it in a lot of ways. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Listen, Roger, I get it. Like, you want to be of service to people in that way as well. If you see an opportunity, even like I talk to people about envisioning our highest best use or ideal life now, or these things I mentioned. And, I guess one of the other fundamental principles I believe in is that the biggest game in life is actually building your capacity to receive, because all the wisdom and answers are out there. Okay. It's just that, I mean, I don't think there's a person on earth who hasn't had a situation where they realize that at some point they were told something and it didn't sink in. And maybe it's a decade later and they hear it in a different way, or they're in a different place in their life. And they're like, oh, that's what that person was trying to tell me. You just didn't have the capacity to receive back then. Right. And so, most people don't build their capacity to receive. They're not open. They're not willing to try stuff. They're not willing to challenge who they are. And, and therefore, when I come from a place of service and wanting to help people, I am the distinction I made, right? Because you can go help people who don't want to be helped, and it's a waste of time. So I look at somebody if somebody really is working on their capacity to receive and they're really open and they want to learn, okay, good, I'm all in, right? If somebody is not that and they're closed and whatever, I don't wish them poorly, but I'll wish them well, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time and energy there because it's a waste of time. If somebody has the capacity to receive, I don't care what kind of wisdom or commitment or whatever you have for them, it's going to go nowhere.
That was a lesson that took me a while to learn.
Me too. Me too.
It's like, if you just move that much, the whole world changes. And you're like, you're not ready. When you're ready, we'll go there and we'll do that eventually. Yeah. Now, you also are a fan of Profit First, correct?
Yeah. So I've had Mike Michalowicz on my podcast a couple of times. I love his work in general. And for many, many years, we ran on Profit First. It was one of the things where I applied a lot of my learning right around money, and it's a way to institutionalize that. It's like, because if everything's sitting in one bank account, not only you, but your team is like, oh yeah, we got money to do that. No, wait a second. We need to put money for taxes over here. By the way, the owner should have a profit coming out, not last dollar, all that kind of stuff. So I love the framework of the system. We instituted it in my firm. We used it for, I don't know, I think it was over a decade or more. And then the only reason we moved away from it is not because it's not phenomenal, but we got to the point where we brought in, a full outsourced CFO service. So they actually, the thing about Profit First is great is it creates a framework and a system that really works for a lot of businesses, that creates some discipline and separation and a different mindset. When you have a CFO service, they're looking at our numbers like regularly and making more real-time advice and decisions. We sort of grew past it. But I'm a huge fan of Profit First. I mean, I recommend it to a lot of people.
I challenge your CFO, because what we call Profit First at your stage is treasury management.
Okay, yes.
It's a little more sophisticated.
Right. No, I agree. And that's what they're doing. I'm not saying that they're not still applying a lot of the fundamental principles of it. It's just that we're not just taking percentages,
No, more dynamic. And that makes total
Yeah.
sense. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I would say two things. I mean, we talked about it a lot. One is just believing. I mean, you got to start with believing that the world's abundant, right? Because everything comes from within. And then I would say frankly, my other biggest hack is that my my wife of 22 plus years also has that mentality. So my partner is aligned in abundance mentality to the point where, as a human, when I fall into scarcity, which happens a lot less frequently now, but still can happen, she's there calling me to abundance, and I get to do the same thing for her.
That is awesome. And it's great that you're connected and that you can do that for each other. You know, it's funny. That's one of the things nobody teaches people how to pick a good spouse and how to think about the values and the goals and the ideals that you want to build together, because probably why most people end up in divorce.
That's right.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I'll try to think of another one because that wealth versus income one was one of them. Yeah, I would say. I mean, I think with the two big ones, because the other big one was that you can't change people if they don't want to change. We alluded to that already. It's just that one was a hard one, and it came much later because I used to spend a lot of time thinking, oh, I can contribute to this person, and wasting time because they weren't ready to change.
Yeah, and that's a hard pill to swallow, and it's even harder when they're
Yes.
family or close, or
Yes.
you have to learn to let
Yes.
go. It drives me up the wall that people have to hit rock bottom before they're willing to change. I'm like, can we not do this? There is an easier way, but so
Well,
be
a
it.
lot. Tony Robbins talks about this. A lot of other people, that there are two motivators for human beings. One is to avoid pain, and one is to gain pleasure. And the avoiding pain is the much bigger motivator.
It very much is. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Create a vision for your life. Trust that you can manifest that, and don't let use outside information and advice as input. Right? Don't have the ego that where you think you know everything at 18. Use it as input, but don't. But if something is in your soul, in your heart that you're driving towards, and that advice is against it, trust your internal truth.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. I know my vision at 18 is very different than my vision today. But that was also because that's what society said we should do. And it was a very different time. And things have changed. It would be nice to have more visioning as a young person and to be exposed to what that really looks like, and what I think more importantly, what really is important versus what you think is important.
Yeah, and even if that vision is going to evolve and change, which of course it will, you're building the muscle, knowing how to do that, and you're also, like I believe in this thing where you got to take the steps forward, right? You don't see the fork in the road until you get in when you're back over here. So you have to move in a direction, and then you might change a pivot or learn more and whatever. But if you don't keep moving forward, you're not gonna see the option.
And that is so true. If people would like to learn more about you and your services, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I have my personal website is CoreyKupfer.com, CoreyKupfer.com. That's got my book, The Authentic Negotiating, the podcast, my speaking, and it also links to the law firm, which is kupferlaw.com. Site as well, so you get there both ways. And then we do a lot of content on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome, and we'll share that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, this was so much fun. I really appreciate it. It was a blast.
Hey, thanks for checking out the full unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can get the full audio podcast with intro, outro, and a ton more details here on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to go back through, and you can also get episode information on the Richer Soul website as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you're automatically updated as to what's going on and every time we release a new episode. The first few episodes of the Richer Soul podcast actually lay out the entire framework that everything is built on over all of these years. So check them out as well. Thanks for listening.